Alrighty all, I think we are going live now, so let's have a look here. Titus just answering that on the streaming. I generally stream on Twitch. This is somewhat of an experiment. Okay, excellent. Looks like we've got everything going live here now. So for those of you that are joining late, you can rewind, you can jump around in this stream. So I'm recording this at 5 minutes before the official stream starts. So that is going to give you a bit of a sense as to what you can, how far you can jump ahead. You can also run it at 1.25 or 1.5 times speed if you want to catch up with the stream. If you're watching this after the fact, then you can obviously jump around like a normal YouTube video. I'm going to respond a bit to people in chat. Had a question, have I seen any leaks? I have seen absolutely no leaks. What are my predictions for nerfs? I think the most likely nerfs will be slight haircuts to the power level of the Raider and the Elementalist, but I don't expect anything sweeping because this league was one of the most diverse metagames we've ever seen. So I don't think we're going to see anything absolutely get gutted. That said, who knows, maybe something will be. And if something that I like to play is gutted, well, we'll find something else. I don't think that slams are going to get buffed unless we see comparable nerfs to the war cries. The slams have been performing extremely well in some environments at least, like particularly hardcore solo self-found. They're the best build. Howdy all. So we have 4 minutes until the actual start of the announcement from GGG. So if you're watching this after the fact, feel free to jump ahead 4 minutes. And otherwise, it's going to be wild speculation for a couple of minutes until we get going. Definitely really excited to try out streaming here on YouTube again. Obviously, Twitch is where most people stream, and I kind of like doing both. But broadly speaking, I find that YouTube works a bit better just because people can find things afterwards. Yeah, there's a comment in chat from Silver Freeman that the slam playstyle and ultimatum circles didn't mix very well for them, and I think that's right. It's a very powerful build, but it wasn't one that was particularly strong in the context of ultimatum. The other thing that was really strong in the context of ultimatum was the two ascendancies that give you complete immunity to ailments. So that was Elementalist and Raider. But if I was going to make a prediction, it would be that Raider is going to lose some of the free elemental exposure from Avatar of the Veil, because Avatar of the Veil was on 90% of high-level Raiders, which was one of the most dominant things we've seen on an ascendancy for a while. Yeah, and Overshare is just saying in chat that that day one ultimatum solo self-found was dominated by slam builds. That's true, but I don't think it's necessarily a problem if it's the best build for day one of SSF. PoE 2 release date is an interesting one to speculate about. I had a question about that in chat now. I've got no more information than you do, but my personal speculation is that we will see a closed beta. So that means one that'll be under NDA in the first quarter of next year, but that is pure speculation. So that would mean that that if I'm correct, there'll be that you'll be able to get into that but not make content on it. Open beta maybe sort of around middle of next year. We'll have to find out though. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the reveal. These are so much fun, honestly, because you always miss things when you're doing them live. And that's certainly something I'll say for anyone watching this late. I'm going to put out a summary video afterwards, but there is a lot of stuff that you will miss. One thing I will just quickly do while we're getting set up, I have a Discord server that I will provide a link to. So that will be in the chat section. This link will be valid for 7 days, but you won't be able to have full access to it until I manually approve you. But there's a link if you're interested in joining my Discord server. And Yeah, fumble. I mean, honestly, it's annoying, but I'd rather us have the 5-day lockdown now than have some sort of than have it get out of control. The problem is that we don't have. Hey, Femore. We are just about to get ready, so I am going to jump over to the actual announcement itself. I've been watching chat. So my setup, I've got the announcement in front of me and chat on a window over to the side with a 12-second delay. So here's my thoughts. Get ready, drum roll. And here we go.
Hi, I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games. Welcome to our live stream and thanks so much for joining us today. Our team had a lot of fun putting together Path of Exile's 3.15 expansion, and we've got a lot to share with you. Today's live stream is a busy one.
So trailer first, new gems, 19 new gems. Making Path of Exile more challenging would be, sounds good.
Metagame in a big way. Thirdly, we'll talk about our plans to make Path of Exile more challenging, restoring some of the adrenaline and terror that you may recall from the good old days of closed beta. Next up, we're going to talk about Path of Exile Royale, the 100-player Battle Royale mode that we experimented with in 2018. We'll be launching a restored and revamped version of Royale today, once our question and answer session will
Oh, cool. Alright, I'm going to be streaming Royale after this.
Anyway, there's a lot to discuss, so let's get started with the trailer for Path of Exile's next expansion.
Increase the volume. Okay, roger that. I'm increasing the volume in the background now.
Many centuries ago, our people traveled to this accursed continent. We return to reclaim our lost relics. But Raycraft grips its secrets tightly. We must wrench them from its grasp.
Okay, so this is looking like you choose. This is giving me Harvest vibes, not the crafting, but the set off attack of monsters.
We know trade. Retrieve our relics and we'll strike a deal.
Oh.
We will follow the path of our forebears.
I just see Exalt an item 5 times and choose the best result. Explosive Concoction, Eye of Winter. Oh, that's Frozen Orb from Diablo 2. Forbidden Light just looks like craziness. Rage Vortex. So much to go through here.
They wait, shrouded in darkness.
Here's a league boss of sorts.
One who may finally challenge them. Wealth and power will be yours. Should you survive our expedition.
Expedition. Alright, that looks interesting. That looks really interesting there. So now we're going to see the deep dive.
Alright, I've got a lot to tell you about. Let's start with the Expedition League itself.
I love how chat just stops when that comes up.
Rayclast in the hope of colonizing it. Rayclast did what it does best, and they never returned. In the Expedition League, you will meet a group of Kalgurans who have set out on an expedition to investigate the fate of their ancestors, and recover special ruined artifacts they left behind. The ancient Kalgurans underestimated the dangers of Rayclast, and this new expedition is no exception. They need your help to protect them from the undead that rise at their expedition sites. As you travel through Rayclast, you'll encounter the Kalgurans at sites they believe their ancestors attempted to settle in the past. By the time you get there, they will have marked the site with signs indicating where chests are buried, holes indicating where their ancestors lie, and will have possibly unearthed some remnants of past Kalguran settlement. Due to the unique nature of Rayclast, the Kalgurans have found that the most effective way to excavate these sites is with explosives. And that's where you come in. You'll place a chain of explosives across the expedition site, carefully planning what each blast is going to unearth.
Alright, that's interesting. So you pick what you want to set off. This is actually, there's an element of a Legion vibe here too.
Any undead freed by the explosions rise from the ground and the slaughter begins.
So it's sort of like Legion, but without having to actually beat up all of the monsters. You just choose which ones you want to set off.
Some of these fallen Kalgur are more difficult and rewarding than others, and have been indicated with special markers. Once you have defeated the army of undead, you're free to open all of the
Lesser
chests
order
you unearthed
artifacts, so
and claim
that's
your
splinters
rewards.
of... I'm guessing.
It's up to you to decide where to place the chain of explosives.
They drop
to
stacked,
maximize
that's a
your
good thing.
gains. Do you unearth a lot of monsters? Do you unearth more special monsters? Or
Yeah,
do you go
OT
for
is
the
saying in
chests and
chat,
try to
looks like
avoid
Harvest.
combat?
I do see that, the whole pack of monsters that
The
attack you
ancient
at
Kalguran
once.
explorers built structures on Rayclust, and you may encounter remnants of these at excavation sites. These remnants have various modifiers on them that, when destroyed, apply to monsters and chests unearthed from that explosion onwards.
Ooh.
Remnants greatly increase drops, but have some very difficult modifiers like immune to physical damage. You'll need to be very careful with your decision of which remnants to chain your explosives through, as they substantially ramp up the difficulty and rewards of the encounters.
Immunity is going to be a dubious one.
Speaking of rewards, there's a lot of cool
No,
stuff to
can't
find.
mouse over these. This is a
Alongside
strain.
valuable equipment and currency items are Kalguran artifacts and logbooks, which we'll talk about soon. The Kalguran traders have made this expedition to Rayclast in order to recover their ruined artifacts. There
So
are many
these
different
are...
types of artifacts.
Oh, these
and
are just
each of the
currency, are
Kalgurans
they?
is interested in a different set of them, with a unique way they
That
want
makes
to trade
sense.
them from you.
So these are
With this
currencies,
expansion, we really
like, as
wanted
in...
to play with the idea of having NPCs that want to trade with you in different ways. So we have themed their behaviors around the concepts of gambling, bartering, upselling, and exchanging. Let's meet the Kalgurans. Tuyen is a mercurial trader who maintains a positive outlook as long as he can, but if you cross a line, his temper changes quickly. Tuyen offers you items with unreasonably high prices, but he's happy to haggle. You can always buy the item at the price he's offering, but if you offer a lower price, he might accept it, counteroffer, or withdraw the item entirely if he is offended by your lowball. He also occasionally sells currency items, so it's worthwhile keeping some of the artifacts he's looking for on hand just in case you see an opportunity. Grog is an average man pushed into Rayclast's dangers. He's helpful, concerned, and a bit fearful. He is very happy for you to do the fighting so that he can stay safe on the sidelines. He loves making deals and trying to upsell you. If you buy one of the items that Grog offers, he'll try to offer you a more complex deal where he improves the item via crafting. If you accept this deal, he'll try to upsell you again and again until you eventually walk away with your purchase.
Okay, oh that's
If you
cool.
can't afford one of these incremental upgrades, you can leave and come back later with enough ruined artifacts to cover the cost.
Alright, I really like
Because
that.
you don't get to supply your own starter item for this process, and have to select an item with promise from the range that he offers, his incremental crafting upgrades are priced rather cheaply.
That's a really good idea. I like that a lot.
Gwenin is a cynical gambler who claims that luck depends on how hard you believe. So you really need to convince
it is the
yourself
first.
that you're going to get that headhunter. If you don't, it's your fault. Gwenin shows you a set of base types with unknown properties. When you gamble by buying one, you'll receive a random item of that base type back. It could easily be a random magic item that you have no use for, but can sometimes be a valuable rare or unique
This will
item.
be a badge.
It's probably
Oh, no.
best to
It's
prioritize
badge,
gambling
yeah.
on base types that are most relevant to your character.
That's...
Once you have exhausted all the items
This
that
is kind of
interest you,
cool.
it's possible
Solo
to use a
self-found players
specific
will
new
use
currency
this.
item to re-roll the gamble window to a set of new items of your current level. Sometimes a base type shows up that is a lot more expensive than it would otherwise be, and gambling on this item has a higher expected value than normal. You're taking the risk, though, that it could still be junk. Danig, Warrior Skald, is the heart of the expedition, its brave leader and lawmaster. Danig is interested in specific types of ruined artifacts and wants to trade these from you for a variety of options, such as currency that lets you re-roll vendor inventories, logbooks, or artifacts that other Kalguran traders are looking for. You can talk to the traders in the wild, in town, or in your hideout. They grant you access
you can bring
to
them
an
to your hideout, that's
expedition
good.
locker, which is like the Heist Locker, a lockbox for League-specific items, which can be accessed in all three places also.
Not a
Or
fan
adding
of
the affinity
another
system to these
one
lockers.
of these lockers.
Among the many relics of the ancient Kalgurans you might find at their expedition sites are logbooks. These ancient books chronicle the locations that their ancestors visited in their exploration of Rayclust.
Oh, so these will be the
A
maps, I'm
logbook
guessing.
item can be rolled to have a set of explicit mods, like an endgame map. Each location within the logbook has its own implicit mods.
Those have lower
as well as
numbers.
a theme that controls what types of remnants can be found there.
Those have
Talk
lower
to
numbers
Danik in
than
your
maps.
hideout and give him a logbook you have
That's
found
interesting.
To go on an expedition to one of the locations it describes.
So I'm
These are all
assuming
exotic
that they've got
places that
lower
no
numbers
exiles have
because
ever
they are
traveled to
harder
before.
than maps.
Just like how a blighted map was one giant blight encounter with no natural monsters, the expedition you go on from a
Yeah,
logbook
Fenmore,
is
it
one
is
giant
D2 gambling.
expedition.
in place from that one NPC.
Expeditions from logbooks are not only different because of their large size, but because there are special objects that you can interact with using explosives.
Yep, here's our
For
blighted
example,
maps.
trees that contain monsters or items, passageways that reveal chests or bosses, and so on. Speaking of bosses, there are some formidable ones for you to seek out, and a set of valuable new unique items and base types that can only come from expedition content.
New uniques and
The Kalgoran
bases.
people are not from Rayclust, so the items do not have the same defensive properties that ours do. Instead of armor, evasion, and energy shield, they have ward. This new base type is a pair of boots that grants ward and can get mods that improve it. The way that ward works is that you have a certain amount of it, and that amount is fully deducted from the first incoming hit that you receive. Your ward is then disabled and takes 5 seconds to re-enable. At that point, the next hit you receive is substantially mitigated in the same way. It's quite a different style of defensive property and works very well in conjunction with systems like evasion, block, or dodge.
That's really,
As
really
the
good with
undead
evasion
enemies you
and
unearth in
dodge.
expedition encounters are fallen Kalgoran explorers. They also have a ward rather than traditional defenses.
So that's the
This
first
unique
hit.
helmet allows you to go all in with ward as a defensive option for your character. It causes all increases to energy shield to
That's a
affect
cool
your ward
item.
instead, grants you a bunch of ward, and helps it recover faster.
You use that with the Trickster
This other unique helmet is
Ascendancy.
also on a new base type that grants ward instead of other defense types, but its properties don't interact with ward. Instead, it prevents you from dealing critical strikes
That's
and grants you Battle
cool.
Mage, which adds spell damage equal to the damage of
That
your
can
main
do a lot
weapon.
with that Rebuke of the Vaal weapon.
The new base types and uniques I showed you here are
This
just
is
some of the ones you'll be able to
interesting.
discover when you play next week. So that's the Expedition League. Each of the developers I have spoken to has liked a different aspect of it, but I have really personally been enjoying the different trade mechanics offered by the Kalgoran NPCs. The gamble window takes me back 20 years on a nostalgic trip, and Tuyin's haggling manages to capture the intense feeling I get when negotiating, and anyone who really knows me knows how much I love negotiating. This expansion
Alright,
also
skill and
promises
support
to
gems, this will be the good
massively
one.
shake up the Path of Exile metagame.
This is always
And we're
exciting.
doing that by introducing new gems. Lots and lots of new gems. For quite a while now, the way we have approached new skills in Path of Exile expansions is to make a bunch of gems themed around an entirely new build or dramatically augmenting a few existing builds. The blood skills in the Ultimatum expansion are a good example of this. While this approach is great in terms of creating interesting new builds, it doesn't always affect every character game-wide. In order to achieve this big metagame shakeup, we've come up with a crazy idea for the Expedition expansion. Adding a gigantic pile of new gems at once, spread among as many different playstyles as possible.
Alright,
Each of these
That's
gems
cool.
can of course be used by many different classes, but we use the list of 19 Ascendancy classes for inspiration when planning these gems. Our goal here is that regardless of which build you're playing, there will be new gems that you can add to your character. Let's go through the 19 new skill and support gems.
so 19 reveals now.
The Earthbreaker support gem can be linked to any slam skill. Upon use, it summons an ancestor totem that uses that slam on your behalf.
Oh, that's cool.
In this example, we've
Ancestor
created a build that
Slam
summons
totem.
multiple ancestor totems that each wield tectonic slam. As you can see, this build covers a large area in fiery death, while you get to stay out of harm's way.
Alright, that's
This
strong.
is a powerful option for chieftains in particular, due to the various totem bonuses available on their Ascendancy passive tree.
Hierophants
Adept
as well, I
players
would have
will
thought.
also be wondering if the Earthbreaker support allows you to create leap-slamming totems, and the answer is absolutely. As with other ancestor totems, the Earthbreaker support also provides a buff to you, granting some increased area of effect with melee skills.
That looks really cool.
Rage Vortex provides a new way to consume your rage, unleashing a whirling vortex that rapidly hits enemies within its range. It gains damage and area of effect based on how much rage was sacrificed. The vortex slows down when enemies survive being hit by it, causing it to deal intense damage to tough targets.
Oh, that's really good.
While you can only have one Rage Vortex active at a time, characters such as Berserkers who are able to generate a lot of rage quickly will find it a great way to augment their
I
damage
wonder if you
output.
can do this. Cold conversion feels really solid with that.
Bone Shatter strikes your enemies with a forceful blow. If an enemy is stunned by this attack, a powerful shockwave is released. The area of effect of the shockwave is determined by the duration of the stun you inflicted.
Not
Each time
impressed
you use
yet.
Bone Shatter against an enemy,
but if the
you
numbers
take
are there-
physical damage yourself and gain a trauma stack. The more stacks you have, the more damage Bone Shatter will deal to both you and your enemies.
Okay.
The self-damage mechanic makes the Juggernaut the ideal class for this skill, because they have easy access to lots of armor to mitigate the downside.
Juggernaut,
Also, the
they say
has
Juggernaut, I
ascendancy
say
passives that
Slayer.
grant increased stun duration,
This
which
is-
help make
this
sure
is a
the
Slayer
shockwave
skill.
is as large as possible.
Partly because Juggernaut's so bad.
Defiance Banner is a new purely defensive banner skill. While you carry the Defiance Banner, it increases the armor and evasion of nearby allies while reducing the critical strike chance of nearby enemies. It also gains stages while carried near enemies and can be placed on the ground to enhance its effects. When the Defiance Banner is placed, it inflicts a taunt on enemies for a duration based on the number of stages the banner had accumulated while it was carried.
Quick poll in chat, do people place banners? I've always found it
new skill is Shield Crush, which swipes your shield towards enemies and sends out forceful waves of damage based on the stats of your shield. These waves can shock
shield throw again
up to 2 hits at once. So while Shield Crush is great against groups, it's also effective against single targets and can be used alongside Shield Charge and Spectral Shield Throw. We've improved both of these skills so that the overall aggressive shield build is more powerful.
Okay, I like the sound of that. They've improved Spectral Shield Throw.
The new Behead support gem can only support strike skills and is basically like a mini headhunter. When a supported strike kills a rare enemy, you'll steal one of its modifiers. Obviously this gem can't be as crazy as the full headhunter experience, so it comes with some restrictions. Stolen modifiers can persist for 20 seconds, and slaying another rare enemy will replace the modifier you have active.
Replace. This is only one at once.
The support gem also grants you more damage against enemies on low life. In conjunction with the Slayer's Bane of Legends Ascendancy passive, this bonus really embraces the execution theme of the head.
That sounds cool. That sounds awesome.
Storm Rain is a new bow skill that fires arrows that stick into the ground. These arrows periodically pulse with lightning damage that arcs to nearby arrows. This skill works very well with multiple projectiles because you can quickly set up a large patch of lightning death.
That's interesting.
Existing ballista skills in Path of Exile pick their own targets, like sentry guns do. They'll start shooting immediately and will generally target the closest enemies. While this behavior is usually great, sometimes you want fine control over what your ballistas will fire at.
Alright,
the focused ballista support gem causes your ballistas to pick the same targets as you, and they will only fire when you fire your own ranged weapon. It also makes the ballistas fire a lot faster than they always would. This support gem allows you to effectively focus fire on specific enemies such as bosses.
That's interesting. I'm not sure it's good.
Concoction is quite a novel skill. It introduces several new concepts that haven't been explored with skills before. Here you can see the Pathfinder throwing an explosive projectile at monsters. Firstly, you may notice that the Pathfinder isn't holding any weapons. This is because Explosive Concoction is the very first ranged skill that can and must be used unarmed.
An unarmed
ranged
skill.
It's also the first skill that directly interacts with the benefits provided by your flasks. When you throw your Explosive Concoction onto a targeted area, it deals fire damage and uses available charges from your Ruby, Sapphire, and Topaz flasks to grant bonuses based on what flask charges were used. The skill still works even if you don't have the appropriate flasks or charges to consume, but correctly managing your flask setup can greatly enhance the power of this skill. What we really love about
don't
this
see
game
that working well because of bosses.
Throwing your flasks at enemies and having them explode. In conjunction with the flask-focused benefits provided by
this is such a Diablo 2 nostalgia trip to choking gas potions, though.
New playstyles are enabled by this gem. This is the ambush skill. It teleports you up to an enemy, blinds them, and exerts your next one-handed melee attack. This exerted attack has a high critical strike chance and multiplier. In addition to this helping your assassinations, you can also use ambush to quickly re-engage targets after dashing away.
That's cool.
Vortexic Burst grants a buff that counts down to 0, triggering a burst of lightning damage around you with a portion of that damage converted to chaos damage. Enemies slain by your Vortexic Burst will also explode, dealing chaos damage around them based on their maximum life. You can stack up many Vortexic Bursts on yourself at the same time. Consider using duration modifiers.
This is like Winter Orb but without projectiles.
So you can cast a skill from safety and then move into a strategic position before it explodes.
Winter Orb meets
when you use Blade Trap, you throw out a mechanical device with 2 copies
Winter
of your
Orb
weapon
meets
attached.
a
These blades
Nova
spin
skill.
rapidly in a circle a set number of times, dealing damage to anything they pass through. When dual wielding, the trap rotates faster but deals damage based on both weapons.
Oh.
Because it's a trap, Blade Trap behaves a little differently to other attack skills by operating independently of your attack speed. This means you'll have some interesting itemization.
Yeah, you use really slow weapons like Ulnatol's Embrace.
Focus of maximizing attack speed.
Well, Ulnatol's Kiss, or is it Ulnatol's Embrace?
Summon Reaper creates a single powerful minion who uses fast melee physical attacks which cause bleeding. While the Reaper is active, you can use the skill again to direct the Reaper to a specific location, dealing a powerful attack along its path. The Reaper wants to be your only minion. It reduces the life and damage of your other minions, and will consume them to heal itself and gain damage and speed buffs. When designing this new skill for the Necromancer, we wanted to explore
This is
the idea
cool.
of having a single ultimate minion. While there were ways to somewhat achieve this before, the Reaper is quite different in its abilities and interactions with other minions.
I really want to see
It also
this
feels much
used
more
with
active and direct
Bloodthirst
enemy
support.
control. One quick note though, the Reaper will absolutely eat your animated Guardian if you're not careful. Forbidden Rite is a powerful new spell that fires an exploding chaos projectile at a targeted area.
Costs a lot of
It
life
also
to
targets a
cast.
selection of enemies in an area around the player's location and fires projectiles at them too. But be careful, Forbidden Rite also inflicts damage on you when cast. If you can find a clever way to mitigate this harmful downside, you'll have devastating and widespread damage at your fingertips.
Need to see the numbers on that. That does not look good
The
yet.
Eye of Winter is a large projectile that fires out a barrage
Diablo
of
2 nostalgia,
spiral
anyone?
formation as it travels. When it reaches its maximum distance or collides with the terrain, it explodes, firing out even more projectiles in a spiral.
Yeah, this is just
This
Diablo
type
2.
of skill is one we've been wanting to bring to Path of Exile for a long time, and we felt this new collection of skills was the perfect place to showcase it. This Inquisitor is using the new Battle Mage's Cry skill, which taunts nearby enemies and exerts your subsequent attacks, causing them to trigger a linked spell on your next melee hit. Here you can see the player taunting enemies with Battle Mage's Cry and using Consecrated Path to teleport to enemies.
This is
The
cool.
slam is exerted, triggering Firestorm to rain down on those enemies.
This looks amazing.
In order to assist with scaling both attack and spell damage, the buff this Warcry provides lets your spell damage apply to your attacks. This property is usually only available on wands and
Spell
certain
damage
unit
applies to attacks.
Mana Bond is a somewhat unusual gem in that its source of power relies on your current mana. Upon use, it creates a rune that explodes at a location you're targeting. This explosion can either deal more damage or cover a larger
Yeah, these are
area
looking
depending on
fantastic.
the state of your mana. The more mana that's missing from your mana pool, the more damage Mana Bond will deal, as it converts a percentage of your missing mana into added lightning damage. The more full your mana pool is, the more area the explosion will cover.
Oh, so you gotta
This means that being
balance.
adept at managing your mana pool
You gotta
becomes
sit at
highly
like 40 or
advantageous.
50%
For
mana or
example,
something.
having slightly higher mana while clearing a map provides greater clear speed, but when fighting tougher enemies, having a lower current mana amount is better.
So you need to pop Arcane Cloak when fighting bosses. That's cool, Mana
Absolution
Bond.
has been designed for Guardians as a spell version of Dominating Blow. Absolution deals a damaging shockwave in a targeted area. When it kills an enemy, it summons a Sentinel of Absolution, which also deals damage by casting Absolution itself. The Sentinels also periodically cast a larger version of Absolution on the cooldown. While the Sentinels version of Absolution can't summon even more minions, they are a powerful army to fight against.
That's interesting. That could be something quite good on an
Helix
Aura
throws
build.
a spectral copy of your melee weapon, which spirals outwards from you, dealing damage to any enemies it passes through.
Oh, it's Vile Spectral Throw
The design of
and
this skill achieves
Diablo
what we always
2's
wanted
Hammer
Vile
skill.
Spectral Throw to be.
Blessed
We thought
Hammer.
It was a really fun idea for a skill, but because of the limitations caused by the soul-gathering requirements of Vile skills, it wasn't possible to use Vile Spectral Throw as a primary skill. Now that Spectral Helix can live up to this purpose, we've reworked Vile Spectral Throw, which we'll reveal closer to release. One of the other issues that Vile Spectral Throw had was that it didn't work very well in indoors areas. However, Spectral Helix improves upon this, as the projectiles that spiral outwards can also bounce off of walls and proceed to hit enemies, rather than simply disappearing.
Bouncing off walls is a great improvement on that. That could be interesting. Alright, this would be the interesting
Over the
thing.
last few years, Path of Exile has really suffered from player power creep. As a consequence of trying to make compelling content, each expansion we release either gives players more axes on which to improve their character, more effective skills to use, or ways to craft better and more powerful items. Measuring from closed beta to now, this Expedition expansion is our 30th Path of Exile release. The amount of power creep varies per release, of course, with systems like Ascendancy classes providing, like 20, 30,
Yeah,
40%
I would have
power
put
creep
it,
at
the
once.
big jump not at
Like with
Bestiary
compound
but at
interest, it would
Abyss
only take
before it.
8% more
Because that was
player
when,
per expansion from new items, crafting,
that was when
systems,
Shaper and Elder
item
items came
acquisition
in.
opportunities, and new skills for player power to grow tenfold since the game has been out. And tenfold is roughly what we measure the increase in player power to be. We may nerf the most out-of-hand cases every launch, but we're only reducing them back down to close to the new baseline. The average Path of Exile character gets more and more powerful.
Yep.
While we do
That's been
occasionally
true.
have new endgame challenges that are appropriate for the current power level of top characters, the rest of the game just becomes relatively easier and easier. Some games handle this by just endlessly and exponentially scaling monster life and damage to counteract player power growth. Eventually, the numbers get too large and you need to crunch them all down again. This is a really cheap approach and makes the game feel like a treadmill where the developers are just turning a knob as they hand you new power, keeping you in the same place forever.
Yep, that's the World of Warcraft approach.
Like that, and hence our solutions are more complicated. At the same time, one of the issues is that players will always pick the most powerful way of interacting with any game system, even when that's not actually fun to play. This leads to behaviors like Flask Piano, or the way that everyone just picks support gems that basically add pure damage. As game designers, it is our responsibility to make sure that the most powerful behaviors are also the most fun to engage with. With that in mind, the balance changes that we are making in Expedition are far-reaching and are going to affect almost all characters.
Alright.
Our goal is not to just nerf specific builds, but to improve the game, its challenge, and to make sure that people want to pick fun build choices. Anyone who played Path of Exile during its closed beta 9 years ago can attest to how challenging the campaign was to play through. Early monsters were dangerous and terrifying, able to kill a character in a few seconds of inattention. Players feared going into the ship graveyard cave because of the flicker strike ghosts. They were careful around rowers because a couple of unlucky charges could outright kill them. Trying to kill a Goatman Shaman while he had Molten Shell up was a pretty terrible idea. Nowadays, however, the game is a lot easier. We added level 2 and 4 support gems without increasing the difficulty of the game to compensate at all. Modern League mechanics shower the player in rare items from early levels, and we didn't make the game any harder in response. In fact, it's very interesting to compare the difficulty of League content with that of the base game. For a few years now, we've been shipping difficult leagues where monster life and damage values are a lot higher than the regular monsters that players fight between those League encounters.
Legion's perfect example of that.
Players enjoy League content because it's challenging. They also told us they really enjoyed the Path of Exile 2 demo at ExileCon, and it was tuned to be almost punitive in terms of difficulty.
That was very difficult, the demo.
Was that it's okay for some monsters to be able to run 20 to 40% faster than the player. In Path of Exile 1's first act, there isn't a single monster that moves faster than the player's default movement speed. We are rebalancing the campaign to be challenging. So far we have focused mostly on Act 1, but with each coming expansion we'll be extending this further. Our plan is that within a year or so we'll have reviewed or touched every single monster in the game.
That's going to be interesting, so slower progression at League start possibly.
Skilled players easily dominating the campaign or running through it to get to maps quickly. It will mean that players who engage with the content will find a consistent difficulty level between League content and regular content. It's worth noting that the behavioral and balance changes to monsters will definitely affect their map versions. For quite some time, Path of Exile players and developers have been keen for a big rework to its Flask system. In the
Flask system rework,
really powerful buffs for a number of seconds after use, and these buffs allow the player to kill monsters quickly, filling the flasks up so they can be used as soon as they run out. With 5 such flasks equipped, the correct behavior is to spam the 1 to 5 keys repeatedly to keep all the flasks constantly up without any downsides. This Flask Piano playstyle was popular enough that players were improvising devices to hit all of those keys at once. Spamming the same set of keys repeatedly to get a powerful set of buffs that rival the power you get from your entire set of equipped items is not a fun game mechanic. It's unbalanced and certainly isn't nice on your wrist. It prevents us from balancing the game well for players who aren't smashing their keyboard constantly and seriously restricts the design space we can use on flasks. In addition, certain unique flasks completely outclass other ones in terms of raw damage output. It was pretty clear to us that Path of Exile will be a lot better if we did some serious work on flasks to make sure that their incentives were aligned with fun rather than with spamming blindly. Most utility flasks and unique flasks have been rebalanced. Expect a lot less permanent power from flasks. Flasks that provide raw defense or raw power are the ones with the biggest nerfs. Some flasks have been selectively buffed a bit if they were underpowered or less popular.
Ooh, that's
In the
substantial.
expansion, there are now 3 ways that you can use flasks. You can either continue to use the rebalanced ones the traditional way, or you can apply one of the 2 new types of currency items to your flasks. The Instilling Orb and Enkindling Orb drop as part of the regular drop pool from regular monsters and chests. The Instilling Orb will cause a flask to be used automatically upon a specific condition being
So you get your half power flasks automatically, or your traditional power ones
this means that
with
in
a drawback.
cases where you would previously want to time a specific flask usage, you can now rely on it happening automatically, with the only trade-off being that it may consume charges that you otherwise wouldn't intend it to. There are a variety of different conditions, and a random one is enchanted onto your flask, overwriting the others each time you use an Instilling Orb on it.
I'm just trying to catch up on chat quickly.
Prevents utility flasks from gaining charges while active, but provides a big boost to their effect, duration, or various ways they interact with their charges.
So they can't gain charges while active, that's the key.
So you can use more orbs to reroll for the one that you want. When a flask removes a curse, it no longer applies a period of immunity to curses. Flasks that remove ailments now only provide a period of immunity to that ailment if they actually removed it. So if you get ignited, use a dowsing flask to remove the ignite and to gain immunity for a while.
That's going to make ailment immunity from other sources like Maven Orbs really essential.
If you want permanent mitigation of ailments, there are other options for your build. Note that we have rebalanced ailment mitigation in general, so there aren't a few options that completely outclass the rest. Monster density in Path of Exile gets a lot higher as you play through the game. When we initially balanced Blast Charge generation a decade ago, we did not anticipate the levels of monster density we would reach by 2021. Monsters in Acts 6 through 10 now generate fewer Flask Charges, and monsters in maps generate even fewer still.
So yeah, it's really going to be tight on flasks.
Flasks don't gain as many charges, so are a little harder to constantly spam, and aren't designed to provide such a powerful slew of permanent buffs. But you can
I'm looking forward to this.
Larger than normal effects, and which are triggered automatically as part of your build. We have reworked existing flasks such as Basalt and Aquamarine flasks, and have introduced new Corundum and Gold flasks. For a while now, we have been concerned with a power gap between support gems. There are gems that grant huge multiplicative damage bonuses, and there are gems that do a bunch of stuff you don't.
Yeah, I think Solid, you can still do mindless killing in lower tier content.
On all the multiplicative damage bonuses and ignore all the interesting utility support gems because their opportunity cost is just too high. We are reducing the damage bonuses on the support gems that are clearly just about huge damage boosts, and trying to give them impactful and appropriate downsides. For example, the Controlled Destruction support gem now penalizes critical strikes multiplicatively. Overall, this works out to a total of somewhere around 20%, potentially as high as 40% damage reduction for a character using a fully 6-link skill with entirely damaged support gems. There's much less impact for characters that use utility support gems or those who didn't have a 6-link setup. This achieves two goals for us. Firstly, the gap between good and bad support gems has been narrowed, creating more interesting build opportunities.
Yeah, that will be some
damage
guidance builds.
Is reduced, which is a goal for this balance pass. As I mentioned, we want to iteratively restore challenge to Path of Exile. It's worth clarifying that we haven't buffed unused utility support gems as part of this balance pass. It's fully intentional that it is a reduction of power for the most damaging ones. When we're designing skills for Path of Exile, the mana cost of the skill is a mechanism to allow us to have larger impactful effects. Bigger skills should cost more mana to cast.
Desdalum, they're reducing the damage multipliers on the pure damage ones. Things like Brutality will probably get a 5% haircut.
In 3.15, triggering skills through support gems will require paying their mana cost. In fact, sometimes it now costs more than casting the gem by hand. Thankfully though, this isn't very hard with well-constructed characters. Certain support gems that were originally disabled from supporting triggered skills, like Arcane Surge, can now be used to support them. Builds that use triggered skills are some of the most interesting characters in Path of Exile, and they're often the best representation of the craziness that our character customization system allows.
Ooh, that's transformative.
Just as powerful as before, but we now have more interesting designs.
No longer reserve 100% of mana. That's going to be really transformative.
Now let's talk about movement skills. As you know, most interaction with monster behavior is essentially bypassed if you're using an extremely effective movement skill. This is okay if you're specialized deeply into customizing that skill, but it's currently the default state for any character if you use Flame Dash, Smoke Mine, or Dash without any further investment. These skills have been rebalanced to be more in line with other movement skills. These are not huge numeric nerfs, but do mean that there is scope for improving the performance of the skills by specializing around them. There are many other balance changes in 3.15, which you can read about in the Balance Manifesto and patch notes next week. To be honest, there are a lot of nerfs here. We completely understand that this level of change will make some people nervous, but it's time we start actively combating power creep and fixing game systems that haven't been working the way we intended them to. I think that the metagame of Expedition is going to be fascinating. The reduction of overall player power, combined with all of the opportunities from new skills and Flask system changes, should create entirely new sets of builds that we haven't previously seen. You guys are always surprising us with what you do.
I'll have to catch up on chat in a sec. Let's see what they're doing
here.
Back
in early 2018, there was a trend
I'm so excited for this.
releasing a Battle Royale mode and getting a lot of good press in the process. We had a running joke in the office that our fast development speed meant that we could probably add a Battle Royale mode to Path of Exile in 1 day of development. As April Fool's Day approached, we tried to do exactly that. We pulled a few developers together and asked them to spend no more than 1 workday each on their contributions to this new mode. On April 1st, 2018, we launched Path of Exile Royale.
Cauldron! Yeah, buddy!
It was a quick and dirty job, so we only left the game mode turned on for a couple of days. It went pretty well considering
I missed it, I was so busy at work.
Whatsoever.
Oh my god, I'm getting destroyed!
After April 1st, we turned the mode off and forgot all about it.
Winner, winner, kitten dinner.
But the community did not forget. In fact, they've been quite keen to remember it constantly and to urge us to bring it back. But that wouldn't be easy, as to actually make it a decent experience would require a lot of custom balance, playtesting, and feature implementation work. A few months ago, we decided to do exactly that. Path of Exile Royale will return today. In fact, immediately after the QA section of this livestream.
Ha!
We're going to run it for the weekend as a test, and then turn it on every weekend for a while, starting the week after Expeditions launch.
This is gonna be awesome.
We'll patch it between weekends with balance tweaks, and if it's popular over the long term, new features. We have no idea what the long-term viability of this game mode is going to be like, so we'll run it for this league and then assess where things stand.
That just
Our
sounds so
initial version
cool.
of Royale from 2018 used Path of Exile's default passive skill tree, which didn't have interesting options for characters that rarely got to level 10. It also used all of our skill gems and unique items as is, where many of the interesting ones were way too high level for these super low level characters to ever find. We've made a completely new Royale-specific passive skill tree that has everything you need to quickly
Royale-specific
adapt your character
tree.
for high-speed PvP combat. It features approximately 90 new custom notable passives, a special new left-aligned window so you can stay aware of your surroundings while allocating skills, and you gain 2 passive skill points per level.
Yeah, nothing about
You're also able to allocate passive
nothing about
skills from
smart loot
any
yet.
of the tree's starting locations, regardless of which character class you picked.
Ooh, this is looking great.
We have
100%
created
random
low-level
conversion.
versions of around 50 iconic skill gems, 20 support gems, and over 70 unique items. These
Oh,
Royale
cool.
items are appropriate for low-level play and include quite a few things that are usually only available at substantially higher character levels in the core game. The whole island has been improved. We've made the terrain more varied and interesting, so that the fights feel different depending on where they take place.
This looks
You'll encounter
amazing.
Flask troves, which provide charges for your flasks. These troves periodically replenish themselves, so expect a lot of combat to occur around them. There are many other small improvements you'll notice when you play Royale, such as an improved spectator mode, improved leaderboard, and ability to pillage items from players through a special interface rather than having them clutter the ground.
That's an improvement.
You don't need to delete and remake your character for each game, as you could just reuse your old one, which is automatically reset to level 1.
That's really
Your
simple
prize for
and
coming
good.
first on a Royale event is this new Roa Dinner hideout decoration. It's a bit like a challenge league totem as it grows more impressive as you win more events.
Oh, cool.
Royale is available to play today, as soon as our Q&A session concludes in about 45 minutes. So patch your Path of Exile client, and when we're done with the Q&A, log in and click to join the Royale event at the bottom right of the screen.
Alright, I'm patching now in the background.
On how the mode works, check out the news post we just made on pathofexile.com. We'll be running the event from today over the weekend. If you don't get a chance to play Royale over the next few days, we'll run it again every weekend other than Expedition's launch weekend for the next few months. Please check it out and let us know your feedback.
Yeah, that sounds great. That really sounds
Keep an eye
great.
out on you.
Oh, we're having a quick, having some sort of
Over the next week,
issue
we'll
there.
reveal the finer
Fact.
details of what's coming in Expedition, including the full patch notes on Tuesday, US time. We'll move
Oh, we're having some tech issues here. We'll just put a little note to that effect in chat.
on to the Q&A shortly to answer your burning questions, but first, let's have a look at the new supporter packs that are available right now to celebrate the launch.
Okay, advanced settings and
Of Expedition and help
I'm
fund
doing it.
ongoing development of Path of Exile 2, and special modes like Royale.
advanced low latency toggle. Alright, hopefully that's going to fix itself. Just
In an optional new third tier for each series. This new tier includes an exclusive apparition portal effect and a slightly better ratio of points.
yeah, it looks like we're having a bit of tech issues here, but
The introduction of these new packs should give you more options for what combination of each pack series you purchase. Like always, it's possible to upgrade between pack tiers within each series.
Royale mode looks amazing.
Thank you so much for your support. Purchases of these supporter packs are the only thing that fund the ongoing development of Path of Exile, as well as expansions like
Yeah, I've just dropped to very low quality,
Royale.
so as
The reveals we showed you today
we can
are
see
already live on YouTube for you to link to your friends in case they missed the live stream. Please do so. We'd love to have as many of you as possible joining our expedition
going
next
to
week.
reverse that
It's
so
time
that
for the Q&A. If you have any
let's just drop to no, let's not go 720. Let's go 720/30. That should hopefully fix the problems we're getting. Yeah, I've just dropped the quality of what I'm pulling from Twitch, and now we'll have the Q&A. So that's really interesting. Like, reversing power creep is something I've wanted to see for a while, but they've got to balance it carefully because you've got to make it so that you're not smashing the power of the middle tier of players. You want to target people like me in order to restore challenge. I think it'd be really good though if we see the end game bosses take longer to fall at the start of a league. Let's see if 480p on what we're pulling from Twitch. So let's catch up on chat at this point. Oh yeah, it could be the patching. Let's actually stop the patching just in case that is it. It shouldn't be the ISP speed. I should be fine on that perspective. Like it's not extraordinary speed, but it's 100 Mbps downstream. And it's also really off-peak times here in Australia. So it's like not sure how long we've been going so far. It's 6:40 AM at the moment. I think, Titus, they're like flasks have been a game design problem for a long time. They're basically something that has been causing just like they massively escalate the difference between the top couple of percent of players who are very good at managing flasks and that sort of middle tier of endgame players. And whilst you want to have some sort of skill discrepancies in the game, I think that flasks have just been off the charts. I am so looking forward to seeing like these changes. All like they've been a lot of them are things that I've been wanting to see for a while, like just getting it to the point that we'll have basically more of an end game because the stuff that you blitz past, like things like tier 9, 10, 11, 12 maps that people blitz past will no longer be
Good morning from
blitz
Australia,
past.
New Zealand.
They'll be
Exile.
part of
I'm
endgame now.
joined here with none other than the Chris Wilson. Good morning, Chris.
Ziggy D's fantastic to watch at times.
That was a lot. Pretty spicy sort of reveals there. And
yeah, we've been apprehensive about that one.
yeah, I imagine there might be a little bit of nerves going into some of the nerfy side of things. I almost said it there, in fact. Some pretty big changes here with flasks and general balance and stuff like that. That I imagine a little bit make it a little bit nervous to reveal.
Yeah, we're pretty confident in the changes though. Some of them have been a long time coming, and it's often the case that we'll have something we want to do in a given league and then push it, both because it's hard to rip the bandit off and make nerfs, and also because the more we make at the same time, the better we can get the balance by balancing around them simultaneously.
Agree with that. You fix everything at once.
We'll get into the nerfs and difficulty changes and flasks and things like that a little bit later, but I wanted to start off with some questions about Expedition League, the new league that's been revealed. My first question is, what sort of failure states do these expeditions have? Like, if you die during
That's a good question.
the explosive excavation process, does it fail, or can you come straight back into it?
It's pretty permissive. You can come back in, basically. There's no timers and no automatic failure. Essentially, as long as you've got enough portals to get to the
Reddit's
area,
going to be hilarious
it's
today.
easy to come back and resume.
Reddit is going to be hilarious. It's like
doing the combat part of it. If you're playing one of the expeditions that's accessed through a logbook and it's got 6 portals, like a map does, for example, so providing you haven't depleted those, you can come right back.
I imagine with a different power level for people to get used to, that'll be helpful.
Yes. That'll be
Like,
some-
it's not like a hard failure state, lose things a la heist or something like that in
Yeah.
this situation. Are the logbooks the mapping system for this endgame only, or are they available sooner?
They're available sooner. They kicked in, I think, Act 3 onwards, so you'll start to get them relatively soon.
Okay.
So that'll give me another thing that'll make it take a lot more time to get to endgame, as I can just
You can make it a bit like the temples of Exile, of course, but they're fully tradable. So if you don't want to play them and just want to rush to maps, you can always trade them for some currency.
You also added Geed gambles, so I'm just going to say...
Yeah, this is the Diablo 2-esque gambling system there. Geed was the NPC that had that mechanic
Are there any specific,
in
like,
Diablo 2.
uniques or items that we can only get through the unidentified gambling with Gwenin, or the other vendors, I suppose?
So we intentionally didn't put any items exclusively in those windows. We didn't want it so that players absolutely have to engage with those systems to get those items. But you can get some quite interesting stuff. Like if you're lucky, for example, while gambling for an item, you can get influenced items, for example. It's not just vanilla rares. There's some fun treasures hidden away there.
Any other things like from other leagues? Like
Synthesized
temple
items would be an
modifiers or
interesting
anything
one
like
to
that?
find out.
Or are you kind of sticking with the new line of thinking of keeping those things to their respective leagues?
We are trying to keep rewards specific.
As
to the
Onovox, I
content that
think we're
generates them,
not
but
going to
there's some interesting
struggle
surprises that
through
people will
the
discover when they're
struggling
doing their
through
gambles.
the
Alright,
core
pretty
storyline if you're a
excited
veteran
about
player.
handling the geek
I
games.
just probably have the odd
now,
death
you
in
mentioned,
there.
Immunity to physical damage, and I must admit I cringed a little bit because I generally dislike immunities. I've got questions about that. As immunities effectively hard shut down specific builds, will these be easy to avoid?
You can choose where you place the explosives, and so you just absolutely don't need to go anywhere near those remnants if you'd rather go somewhere else. And we prefer to have really hard modifiers like this, because either immunity to physical is kind of going to prevent you doing the encounter, or it's going to not affect you at all, and it's entirely upside to tag that one. And so because of this, there's interesting placement choices you'll have to make. It's never going to be the case that
This decision I
immunity to
don't really
physical
like
around
that
you and
much.
The entire expedition is a waste of time. It's relatively rare to get each one of these hard modifiers there, but it'll mean that depending on your build, you're going to completely change the strategy of how you place the explosives. And it's worth noting that the remnants really do ramp up the difficulty quite a bit. Like, players will see that they provide benefits and think, sweet, I'll just tag all of them. And you should only do that if you've really read what they do and actually feel you have a character capable of doing that content, which will be slightly harder to achieve in this league compared to previous ones.
It sounds like you'll know if you hit the wrong one. You kind of touched on my next question there a little bit, but why use something like immunities then if it's effectively completely avoid, or just do it because it's a free pass?
Because if it doesn't have a large impact in either direction on your character, then it doesn't really matter which one you want to hit. And we want to avoid the situation where every remnant averages out to it's a bit harder and gives you a bit more items. We're making it so that, it actually has an impact on your character. Just like how you care if a map you're running has temp chains or not. People actually do read maps before running them, and that's a good thing.
Some people.
Yeah. Concerning. They'll have to now.
At least the stacks seem fine.
We had a very good co-op league last league. Just want to say that Ultimate was fantastic for co-op. How does this one work in co-op?
I believe that only the map instance owner can actually place the explosives, but everything else is cooperative. You can share the drops and share the fighting, and so it's really good to bring a team for it, especially with the new difficulty. It is basically the case that nowadays when we're designing leagues, we're not going to allow ourselves to release something that works terribly in multiplayer. Like, it's a mistake we've made in the past, and part of the process now is asking the question, how does this work with parties? To the point where we have some pretty cool league ideas. They get put back on the drawing board because they really aren't party compatible.
That's really good to hear. I've very much enjoyed the new trend.
Party play is fun if people have not tried
does
it.
the currency stuff kind of like spread out between the players? Like both people get access to the trade windows, or only if it's their map, or how does that work?
My understanding, I'm just going to check this. Hey guys, all the players can access the vendors, right? Yeah, it's all good.
Okay.
All players can
Yeah.
access the vendors
All
could be a
good.
bit
Nice.
interesting.
I feel
This
like I'm
means-
winning.
Yeah. If it's not the case, they'll fix it.
I feel like I'm winning the Q&A if I ask you a question. You have to look up to the side to ask Jonathan or whoever's sitting next to you. I have people in the background.
Today's crowd is Mark and Rory.
Hi, Mark and Rory.
I'm just having a look in the background at the
next up,
any
I wanna
new
ask you
information
about
that they've
some of
got.
the new skills. Normally, I leave the skill stuff a bit because technical information is better read when you reveal the gems a little bit closer to release. But this time you have 19 skill gems, one for each ascendancy class, it looked like, and that's pretty huge. And some of these are also very interesting. So let's just rattle off some of these skills. Rage Vortex. It's limited to one active at a time, and it looks pretty cool. But does this take attack speed into consideration then, since you can only have one of them?
Yeah, that's right. If you have increased attack speed, it affects the speed that your vortex attacks. You can just imagine it like a detached copy of yourself cycloning, basically, right? Like it spins off a copy of you doing a cyclone. And so this means that if you have increased attack speed or various other bits and pieces, it will be acting like you would do with cyclone yourself.
Can you ramp that in? I saw some of the concerns in chat with like that clear speed looked like it might be an issue with it. Can you ramp that in terms of AoE a fair bit, maybe with like melee range or something like that?
So there doesn't seem to be anything
Here's the
small
thing, guys. When we're
listed
filming this
on
footage,
the
we can do choices.
website.
We can film the low-level footage.
I was just
or
having a
we
look
can
for
film
that then.
in-game stuff. And so the team, being how they are, made nuts in-game stuff. We're talking pimped out characters, like as far as you can go, right? Like mirror-worthy gear, and they had these builds that cleared the screen in seconds, and the Rage Vortex was, you know, the size of Pluto. It was just ridiculous, right? And so we filmed a bunch of footage, and it looked really powerful. The problem is, if we stick that as the first thing you see of the skill, you're going to assume, cool, that's without support gems, I'm going to ramp this up a lot. And so we toned it really far down for the... A lot of the footage you're seeing here is intentionally completely unsupported versions of the skills, and you can see the difference between the vanilla one with almost monster AI off really simple stuff versus the higher level stuff, and we didn't go too crazy on the high level stuff. So yes, you can take these skills and really go a bit further than we showed with them.
It's always up to the players to min-max these ones. I love when you mentioned Pluto, because I knew the space nerds were going to come out and chat and be like, Pluto's actually small. Guys, it's a planetary body, or an asteroid body, even if it's not a planet.
And
it's still a
for
lot
clarity,
bigger.
That's still a large amount of area of effect for a skill, right?
Alright, maybe it's not technically planet size, but come on. Okay. So with Bone Shatter, the new stun favorite, is there a limit to the trauma stacks, or is the limit just killing yourself?
You will be dead long before you work out what the limit is.
Sounds like a challenge.
That's a challenge. That's a challenge.
Some big, thick armor jugs out there, right? That are going to take that one up, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think the trauma stacks drop off when they expire as well, so you have to be able to attack quite quickly to find out if there's a limit.
Nice. Focus Ballista seems to allow you to greatly enhance your single target by having effectively 2 6-links going at the same time, damaging the same target. Will this just be like the new go-to for boss killing setups then?
Well, you already could have a second 6-link for your totems that you were using, essentially, like an existing ballista. This is a bit stronger damage-wise, of course, because it's shooting faster, but one important note here is it's going to stop shooting when you're evading the boss abilities, whereas an existing totem would have just kept plucking away at the boss. So there's pros and cons here, but yeah, if you have the ability to shoot uninterrupted at the boss, then this is the way to ramp that damage up.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see.
I'm pretty excited about the reveal of a grenade flask throwing skill. So does Explosive Concoction simply consume charges from Ruby, Sapphire, and Topaz flasks to add more elemental damage? Or are there some other impacts based on the actual flasks you have equipped?
So, by default it does fire damage, and if you have those special flasks equipped, it will consume some charges to add damage if you're using the lightning and cold ones. For the ruby flasks, it doesn't add additional damage, it increases the ignite chance, and so you can really ramp up your ignite build that way. It already does plenty of fire damage as it is. And this means that you'll need to consider how you're rolling your flasks, of course. You may want to roll so you've got more charges available, especially if you plan to actually use those flasks to stay alive. And so this build plays pretty differently to other ones.
Yeah, that's going to be an
Is there any way to,
intriguing build
scale the
concept.
flask effect usages of the skill?
That's a good question. How would you answer that?
No, it doesn't. You don't change the rest. Just how much.
Yeah, the skill itself, you don't change how much it's consuming from the flasks, but of course, because it consumes quite a lot as you're using it, you want to make sure you have ample access to charges, whether they come from the flask being better rolled or whether they come from kill speed.
Let me see if I can fix that echo.
One, especially because it's no weapons equipped. Can you have like a shield equipped with that? Or
Yeah, I believe so, as long as you're unarmed.
okay. The Reaper skill, the new summoning skill, looks...
I'm not going to be able to fix it now, sorry.
But it's designed to be more of like a single minion build, which you talked about a bit. How is that able to compete with the insane area coverage that you get with minion swarm setups?
Basically just damage and the ability to afflict bleed and control it better. It certainly has more safety issues for your character if you only have a limited number of minions, but of course in return you get to clear faster potentially. It's worth noticing that you do want to have a small swarm so that you can feed people please not Discord call me things. It's worth noting you definitely want to have a small swarm so that you can feed the Reaper. She definitely likes to devour guys when she's low on life, and so yeah,
I must say I thought that Discord call may have been me.
It seems like the sort of thing
That was Chris.
An active summoning setup in addition to having that minion out all the time, and then maybe supplement with that. Like, I imagine if it doesn't consume super quickly, you could still have some minions out on the field doing stuff as well as getting consumed.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can have minions, they're fine, they're just weaker than normal, right? So you just shouldn't go all in on those minions. She'll grab them from time to time whenever she wants buffs, but if she's low on life, it's a lot more aggressive in terms of how quickly she wants to feed.
Chad was asking if they consume golems, but I'm pretty sure that's a yes, because it even consumes your Intimate Guardian.
Yeah.
Nice.
I wonder what you'd use that with, because you could use it with the Elementalist to auto-resummon your golems.
Has been a long time coming, I think. Were there some specific challenges in designing and balancing the skill?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because the base version of this that we were inspired by is from a game that doesn't support gems, and so we had to be very careful when designing the Path of Exile version to make sure that it works well when you do crazy stuff, right?
So this is the Winter Orb from Diablo 2.
The obvious question is what
talking
happens
about
with
now.
multiple projectiles, and the answer here is that the final blast of shards is the one that gets the additional projectiles. That can shotgun, right? So that's quite an interesting choice we had to make, because you have the question of shooting the eye into the boss and having a lot of those shards hit the boss at the same time is very damaging, and that's one of the really iconic ways of using this type of skill, the ability to aim that correctly. Now, the true degeneracy comes from traps, mines, totems, unleash, all that kind of stuff, right? Like, you can have some eyes on the screen. Let's just say we designed this one for performance.
Okay. Mana Bond seems to mess around with the concept of mana casters. Does the bonus damage from the missing mana scale up as your maximum mana increases, or is it based on the percentage of missing mana instead? So does it scale the same way?
It cares about the number of points of missing mana. So you want your mana
Oh,
pool
that's
to be as big as
really
possible,
interesting.
and then you want to have emptied it if you're caring about damage there. So for the area of effect increase, it cares about percentage of missing, and for actual damage increase, it cares about numeric mana missing.
Okay, so the damage scaling still fits into the kind of meta of mana casters that exists currently, even though it kind of flips it on its head a little bit conceptually.
Yeah, Arcane Cloak with that.
Let's move on to
looks,
difficulty.
Arcane Cloak will be so good with it.
What can we expect from behavioral and balance changes, were the specific terminology mentioned there, to monsters in the campaign?
There's a lot of stuff here, and it's kind of what happens if you go through and redo stuff, you know, in 2021 that you set up a long time ago. Like, you have to remember, when we first set up Path of Exile's early acts, I mean, it's had some maintenance since then, but we were children, essentially, you know, making our first game, right? Like, we were in our early 20s, have never done one of these before, right? You know? So it took some actual, like, adult supervision now for people, you know, like Mark and Rory and stuff who know what they're doing to go through and make that content pretty good. So basically, the monsters have more life, they move faster, they on average deal more damage per second. There's lots of aesthetic changes, you know, a bit of like modern, let's make this stuff, not necessarily like redo the art, but in terms of making skills and stuff, like feel a lot better than the monsters are using. And the AI has been redone for a lot of monsters in terms of how intelligent, you know, where they use skills. There's even some leading behavior where I think Hellrake will shoot his glacial cascades out in front of where you're running to, trying to tag you, which is terrifying when it happens to you.
That's gonna be a lot scarier.
Yeah, you really wonder what's happening there.
A Hellrake is going to be really dangerous
in
gauntlet type events.
Like, it's less a matter of aggroing the entire screen when you run around. So there are improvements here to make the early game actually like appropriately simple in some ways, despite being deadly. We had a look at monster density in the first act. We actually found that the second half of Act 1 had much lower monster density than the first half, so we fixed that. We've added some new monster types to Act 1, specifically in the prison and Merveil's cave, so yeah, it does feel pretty different, and we kind of have a thing at the moment at the office where we'll kind of dare team members to just play through Act 1, I'll watch you, and it's fascinating to see the results. And so yeah, they're working through the other acts as fast as possible so that we don't get too much of a jump between the two types of content, but basically the intention is that the campaign is actually a fun experience to play through, and for players concerned that doesn't add to their mapping experience, yeah, you can probably still use your advanced PoE skills to get to maps quickly. Like, it's not that much of a speed bump for the game to have some challenge along the way. You'll still get there in hours, it's fine. And secondly, these changes do affect maps a little bit. The monsters will start to become more intelligent, and a year later, maps will be quite a lot more fun to play because all the monsters will do intelligent stuff.
Intelligent monsters sound like an interesting
thing. You
thing.
mentioned the reduced aggro range as the thing, because that sounds like a trend towards fighting fewer but more interesting and tougher enemies, which is something that I've wanted to see for a long time. So is that a trend that we can expect to continue?
We want there to be enough enemies that it
I saw on the question
does feel
about
like you're
when
fighting
is
packs, of course,
3.15
rather than
playable.
just
It'll
single
be
super intelligent guys.
it'll
But at the
be
same time, you know,
a
there's no need to
full
spam
week from now.
monsters
Sorry,
if you
sorry,
don't
8
need to,
days
right?
from
Like, it
now.
affects performance,
If you're
it
on
affects a
PC,
number
if
of
you're on
factors.
console,
So
I
we want the
believe
fights
it
to
to
be
be
part of
12
the
days from now.
and
But you'd want to
we
check
haven't
that
gone
on the
for
Path of
reduced
Exile
monsters
website to be
in
certain.
maps here. It's
Just
just
as I'm
making
not a
sure it's
console
appropriate
player.
for the campaign.
It leads into the idea that I often talk about on stream, which is
Difficulty.
John, I
yeah,
drank it.
like-
Sorry.
just a lot of spammy stuff happening all at once, or difficulty
Ultimatum.
that you can actually read and engage with. Yeah, Ultimatum versus, say, the boss fight of Ultimatum.
Right. And this is something that we worked very hard on with Expeditions Combat, because we looked back at Ultimatum and just said, like, this is just throwing monsters at the screen, right? Like, this is a case where you kind of close your eyes, spam your clicks, and hope that you survive. Whereas with Expedition, we want it so that the monsters, you're purposely choosing the hard monsters, you know, a bit like Legion, for example, and then you're actually able to interact with them in combat with telegraphed attacks and interesting stuff going on. And so we think we've done a much better job with combat in this league. In fact, while in the video I explained that I liked the NPC mechanics with the merchant trading and stuff, honestly, the actual moment-to-moment combat of playing the Expeditions is a breath of fresh air compared to recent leagues that we've released.
It's good to hear.
Am I the only person that
what
liked
should we
the
expect in
Ultimatum
terms
combat
of
encounters a
other
lot?
nerfs?
That you haven't mentioned in the video. Is there anything else?
I think that it's better to wait for the manifesto that we're going to be posting about that stuff. We didn't hold back on the usual nerfs that we do. There are buffs as well. It's just the usual balance pass. But one thing to bear in mind is because there are so many core changes to Path of Exile systems here, we have been relatively liberal with other nerfs that we've needed to make. Like, this is the right time because the metagame is going to be different. Normally in a Path of Exile league, players will say, okay, I know all the good builds. The question is whether these new bleeding skills are the best build or not. If they are the best build, I'm playing it. If they're not the best build, I'm playing the one that I already like. And it's pretty understandable. Here, you don't know what the best builds are. We've nerfed the best builds. We've buffed the non-best builds. We've changed how flasks work in a very large way. The game plays differently. Like, you can't walk into this expansion knowing what's going to be amazing. And that's going to be quite an interesting process of discovery. So the number of viable builds, both due to the uncertainty and due to the fact that there are actually more viable builds now, is going to be quite high. So when you see the manifesto, we'll do our best to explain the reasoning behind the nerfs. We don't want to do it arbitrarily. Like, we understand that nerfing the game will turn some players off, and it's generally seen as a negative thing. We would only do this if we felt that it was the right thing for Path of Exile, both in the future and immediately.
That's a good lead into asking about, like, so recent leagues have been pretty nerf heavy in general, with like fewer buffs to underuse skills and builds. And while the goal is pretty clearly, as you stated in the video, to start reining in power creep and up the challenge of PoE, can we also expect some love for some of the older things for people to get excited about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've definitely selected old skills that need some work and buffed them. You know, we've got a growing list of those internally, and as the team discover more that are easy for us to numerically change, we do that. And I'm careful not to overpromise here, because in the past we threw numbers around of number of skills that were buffed, and then someone looks at a skill kind of sideways and says, that's not really a buff. So I'm not going to name any numbers, but yeah, there's a bunch of skills that we've been working on, and you know, it's going to continue, right? If we see stuff that's below the curve, we will make sure to adjust it. Now, one thing that's important to bear in mind here is, like, when we're looking at builds that have been popular recently, we're seeing like Ice Spear, Spark, Burning Arrow turning up just out of nowhere because people find clever ways to use them. And those are not skills that we said, oh yeah, no one's using Burning Arrow, let's add 30% more damage or anything. This is a case of players saying, oh, here's a cool combo, and then it starts to take off. And so there are a lot of sleeper skills there that probably don't need buffs, that are just waiting for the right moment to be found. Now, of course, there are also ones that do need buffs, and we've been careful to buff those ones.
How do you find managing the community reaction to dealing with power creep like this?
This would be an interesting one.
It's difficult to communicate this stuff because everyone who's watching this can hear the explanation and it makes sense, but I don't expect all the players to watch this. It's hard to actually have someone like read the patch notes, see a change to their favorite skill that they know and love, and get excited to play that particular release, because like it's what the safe option in the back of the mind is to play the thing, and we've just told them you're going to make 10% slower progress playing that thing, which is fun in the context of a more balanced game where now you're getting a better ratio of rewards per time and various other bits and pieces. But it is difficult to communicate this, and it's so tempting to just play for player expectations and throw entirely buffs around and never touch anything nerf-wise. You know, we don't have to come into work and nerf stuff. If we wanted to just be popular and have record player numbers, we would just buff, 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 and then the game would die relatively quickly because there's no actual challenge left. We want to be the action RPG that despite having been out for a decade, still maintains some degree of a level playing field, and that requires occasionally we have to rip the band-aid off here. Now, it's been tempting.
I think
to
that's
leave
what the
all of
Harvest
this to Path
nerfs
of
were
Exile
about
2
too.
launch day, right? Like you rock up to Path of Exile 2, and the game is entirely different, and that jeopardizes the launch day to some extent. We can find out now how these things actually play. We can find out now what the reaction is going to be, and make sure to have it in an appropriate place by PoE2 launch day. And so this means, like, players, if you play this and you actually, like, 2 weeks into it, hate what we've done, you know, post some constructive feedback, explain why you found other behavior more fun, explain what you'd like to see in the future, and we will read it. We do have our own vision for what we're doing here, but at the same time, you know, it's a game we're making for you guys to enjoy, and we believe that a greater degree of skill variety being used, and also some uncertainty at League launch about what the best builds are actually enjoyable things. Because we see people complain constantly, including our own staff, that they already know how the League is going to go because they know what build they're going to play. They kind of understand how it's going to play out. And we want to create some mystery there. We want it so people are actually
Hey,
pushing
Jack
to find the
Phoenix.
best builds.
That's a good time to ask, like, do you have a specific vision for difficulty that you'd like the game to reach? I know in the past it was mentioned that ideally the game would have periods of casual gameplay with those spikes in difficulty. Is that still the vision, or has it kind of changed over time?
Yeah, that is the vision. We do want it so you can play relatively safely and then have spikes of difficulty occasionally. And this is what you'll see when playing League content that we've been releasing for the last few leagues. That content is fun when you're playing through the various encounters. The problem is that the campaign and kind of map content between the leagues can get so much easier. It's just so far under the curve. Like, we're having situations where when we're balancing the monsters for like Ritual or Delirium or something, they've got like triple the hit points of regular game monsters. You know, we're sitting there doing correct balance for the new stuff, and the old stuff was languishing with incorrect balance. And that's why we've been working to raise it back up again, and also to make sure there's more consistent rewards and so on. So it's worthwhile playing both types of content.
That's something I
couple
really
of
look forward to
questions
seeing.
Here that have been picked up from chat that kind of touch on the same area of topic, which is how do you feel this impacts like a player who maybe doesn't play as much Path of Exile, but has in the past, due to power creep, been able to access more content, been able to do Shaper and Elder, and have enjoyed that experience as a result? You're making the game a lot harder overall.
This is a good
in
question.
general. How do you feel like it affects those players, and how do you want it to affect those players?
Well, there's a couple of things here. The first one is that if you wait a week, read what the best build guide is, or watch your favorite YouTuber who's worked out how to play the game properly and do what that person did, you can probably still get similar results, right? Like, we're not talking about big nerfs here. This isn't the big difficulty change. There could be a big difficulty change in the future. This is the first step down that path to see how it's received and how much more fun it is and so on. We're hoping the response is that it is actually more fun. So it's still going to be possible for casual players to get to the end content. And then the second thing is, philosophically, should there be content that requires a lot of work that not everyone can get to, right? I'm not saying creating content for the 1%, I mean creating content for the 15%. There are arguments that there should be content that the casual player just can't see without significant time investment. Now, of course, it sucks if that's something they were seeing without time investment before, and now you've taken it away from them. But over time, as we maintain the difficulty in a good place, any new expansion content we add, like at the next endgame expansion, for example, maybe that will be difficult enough that the casual players may not get to see that without a bunch of work.
Backing onto that question, there's been like content you've added that has been tuned towards the power creep. So like new content, difficult content, higher end game bosses, league content, stuff like that, that is designed for the level of power we had previously. Is some of that stuff going to be tuned to the
We
new?
are making sure it's in a good place balance wise. A lot of it's to do with how late into the league people see it, right? Like, let's say the league's out for 3 months. We're not saying it should take 90 days of grinding to get to some of the content, right? That means people have to just sit at their computer for the entire 3 months without a job, which is unreasonable. But at the same time, is it okay that people are killing the absolute end bosses within days of the league coming out, right? Like that. It feels it could take a little bit longer. Now, at the moment, we're not just extending that arbitrarily. Like, we're trying to make actual reasonable balance changes to the game rather than just saying, oh, this grind is twice as long because we want people playing longer. You know, that's a bit of a cheap shot there, but we are looking at ways that we can make sure that there's a lot more progression before you reach and the end of the game and run out of stuff to do.
Yeah, that I'm looking forward to a fair bit, because I think we just blitz through yellow maps too fast at the moment.
Expands the question out to, is that more about like, you know, the Tai killer killing the boss in the first few days, or is it more about like the larger bulk of players killing bosses in the first few days.
I think
Whereas-
it's just more that it'll take
And
longer
people
to
are
get to the point
vicariously
that you
through
can
the top streamers and
that you
stuff.
can beat
It's a
everything,
question
like
of
more
whether or
character
not
improvement
you want
steps.
your favorite good streamer to take a bit of time, whether you want to race, if you see what I mean. Like these as events to to kill top bosses and so on. Is that more fun if it takes a little bit longer? And we haven't extended this particularly large amount. It's more of a philosophical question here, but we are trying to experiment with this in ways.
I
that
think
don't
what we'll
just
see
purely
is that
say to
now
players, "Hey, that thing you used
people
to do is
that
now just gonna take
can't
longer 'cause we
do
feel hard,"
like
There are
people
no,
that
experienced nerfs,
used
for
to be able to
example,
do
in this
shape on a
expansion,
5
even
link
though we
might need
desperately
to get a
want the
6
race to
link before
100
doing
to take
shape up.
what it used to
I think
do.
that's the
That's
sort of
not a
level of
change we're
changes we're
making,
seeing here.
without careful
People that
consideration
used to
and some upside
do
to it.
Uber Elder
This is all
with
kind of ramping towards
3
like having
powerful
less of an
influenced
overt
items
jump to
or 3
Path of
powerful
Exile
influence
2's
mods
gameplay.
might now need 5 powerful
How do
influence
you,
mods,
like, what happens
which will
if,
take a little bit longer to
it
get to.
feels like
Same
it's
with
going in the
Maven.
wrong direction as you get
towards Path of Exile too? How much room is there to kind of like shift things in a different direction, do you think?
This is why we're doing it now, right? Path of Exile 2 is at least a number of leagues away, and if we continue this work rather than just kind of sweeping it under the rug for later, which is what we were doing before to some extent, if we actually proactively start this now, we can get the feedback and data that we need to make sure it's in a good place, because we've been careful with Path of Exile 2. Every system change we've made is an improvement on PoE 1, and the content is great, right? There is no doubt that Path of Exile 2 is going to be successful. The scary thing is where it comes balance-wise, because we don't want to launch it with the crazy tier of Path of Exile balance that the game has evolved to with power creep. And so this is our strategy of carefully getting things into the right place before PoE 2 is released, and so the players have a good expectation of where things are going and what they're going to receive.
I want to get onto Flasks because that's a huge topic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Flask can be big.
So not only have Flasks, like the Flask issue effectively contributed to play hand strain, but the design intention of the entire system seems to have been lost over time. So it doesn't really seem like a very easy thing to change, though, however, because it has some really far-reaching gameplay and balance implications and intertwines with builds and all sorts of other gameplay aspects. How do you think the proposed changes are going to change the moment-to-moment gameplay of Path of Exile?
I think moment to moment, you're going to be less reliant on your flasks, like they have less overall power contribution to your character, and your wrists will hurt less, I think.
That's very good to hear.
Yeah, that's
I've
true.
got more questions about
Flask
that later,
piano
but,
has been
Does the new
overkill.
Flask charge like gain balance mean that we're like simply forced to use our Flask more strategically as a result?
You still get a lot of flask charges. It kind of shows how bad it was that we can cut map flask charge game by 3/4 and you still get plenty. Like, that was just to prevent it being literally free to use your flasks. But ideally, yes, there'll be a lot more strategy, especially if you choose to use enkindling orbs, because they really ramp your flasks back up to, like where they were before, but in return you don't get flask gain while the flask is active. And so that means you've got kind of super flasks that you're intentionally starved on charges, and you can choose which ones they are.
How does this affect boss fights and the Flask charge gain from boss fights, or is that left unchanged?
So it will affect boss fights that have ads. If there's a bunch of monsters being spawned, they'll grant less charges. A lot of boss fights, especially newer ones, don't really have ad waves. Like we give you flask charges during Cyrus fight phases, and that hasn't been changed. That's about the same. If you want to have more uptime or power during boss fights, you can use enkindling orbs if you feel that's necessary for your build. This is something we've playtested. Like maybe it's a bit harder, but harder with bosses is kind of the right direction.
I noticed that some of the utility flasks in specific have been nerfed heavily, like Basalt Flask being changed to give more armor instead of mitigation for any build. Now, this whole change is a bit counter to my expectations with this systems change, as I thought Flask would be kept fairly powerful in effect, but reduced heavily in uptime. So what led to this approach of making the Flask weaker as well?
Well, there's two things going on here. We wanted more strategy and less spam, and we also wanted less overall flask power. Like, the intention here is not just, make flasks more interactive and fun, but also nerf flask power. Now, in this case, because you have enkindling orbs, you can choose between the uptime and power choice, right? Like, if you want flasks that are weaker, that can be used quite frequently, just use them how they are. Like, you get them still quite a lot. And if you want ones that are impactful like before, but you use less frequently and more strategically, enkindling orbs can help. And of course, instilling orbs let you trigger on conditions where it's necessary for that type of flask.
That,
Yeah, the conditional
auto-triggering the
flasks
flask
triggers
stuff
are going to be
seemed
really interesting.
Will we get like a list of the sorts of things that you can trigger on?
Yeah, we'll put that together. So it's pretty cool. There's some interesting stuff there. So there's like trigger on adjacent flask use and various interesting stuff like that. As well as all the conditional ones.
That's
like, we're not
interesting.
holding back on trigger on bleed, for example. Like, all of the things that you'll need to trigger on are definitely there.
This is something I thought of while that was being discussed in the video today only, but why make that like an item that you craft randomly onto the flask? I know that's kind of Path of Exile style, but instead of having the auto flasking thing be something you can set up via like a menu or something like that?
We don't see this as QOL. We see this as a trade-off you're making economically and for strategic reasons. And it's not too hard to find these, right? Like it's, I mean, you wouldn't set it up on every flask throughout your gameplay. Like it's an end game thing, and it does take, a bit of work to get your flasks set up how they are, but it's like GCPing your flasks, right? Like no one is complaining that it's too hard to quality their flasks up. It's the same kind of thing. It's about that much effort.
Okay. Do these new currencies going to be used on unique flasks as well?
Yeah, unique utility flasks.
Cool. So no life flasks for those auto trigger.
We would like the enkindling and instilling orbs to work on life flasks. There are just some interesting technical challenges and balance challenges there. So we haven't been going nuts with like nerfs to how the non-utility flasks are working here, as far as I'm aware, at least. And like there's questions like, if I drink a life flask, then I drink a different life flask, then a third one. The way that it internally deals with those life gain buffs is complicated. So when the buff ends, it's hard to say which buff is ending when in various ways, and so triggering when the buff ends, which is one of our conditions, doesn't work particularly cleanly. So we've got some work to do there from a technical point of view. And then if we're allowing auto triggering and ramping of your life and mana and hybrid flasks, we certainly want to do a balance pass on those as well, but that's a future thing.
Okay. How will Pathfinder work with all of these changes?
It should be fine. It should be fine. There's a the Pathfinder is still very much focused on essentially the more strategic flask usage. We've not wanted to take away from that particular build.
Yeah, Pathfinder I think will be in a bad place without piano.
They'll have the ability to trigger where it makes sense. So if your strategy was wait until I'm got corrupted blood on me and then use staunching, you can of course rely on the flask triggering automatically if you choose to. And at least if there is a piano element to it for ideal play, that's something players are specifically choosing to do by specifically saying out of the 19 ascendancies, I want the one which wants me to push the keys quickly. Whereas currently one could argue that all the builds benefit from pushing the keys quickly.
Okay, so there's a big.
I wonder what this will do with the heist belt that grants you. I think there's a heist belt that grants flask charges conditionally. There's also a timeless duel that does something along those lines. If you have empty flasks.
Flasks used prior to being ignited, it'll have no effect. So there's a bit to unpack with this change, I think. Reactive flasking could be a really good thing for gameplay, I feel like. In some cases, for example, you're fighting a boss that ignites you, so you've got your finger hovering over the flask to get ready to douse that ignite, and that is like engaging gameplay effectively. However, there's some cases in Path of Exile where this sort of change is potentially concerning. Like, for example, you cannot anticipate being frozen sometimes when enemies have blanket added cold, or there's a mess of enemies a la ultimatum that you cannot identify sources of potential freeze from. So are most players going to need to build freeze immunity to avoid awkward and unexpected freezing while mapping, for example?
Well, there are a lot of options here. Your first one is you can get an instilling orb to trigger on freeze. If you really don't want random freezes, then you set up your orb so that as soon as you're frozen, it unfreezes you, right?
Oh, that's strong.
The second option is good reaction times, right? You forego having to do that, and instead, when you're frozen, you press the button if that's how you want to play. Then you've got alternate ways of doing freeze mitigation. There's also the aquamarine flask now has an implicit property of reducing like chill effects or freeze effects on you by 40%, so that will still allow you to perform actions and so on. And so there are several different ways you can deal with this, but at the end of the day, if it's a chance that monsters can freeze you based on their properties, then you have to have some way of dealing with it.
Wait, so the aquamarine was reduced freeze effect, that means you can still do stuff while frozen? It's just slows you down instead?
Yes, you can.
Oh wow. Okay.
Okay, so it'd be 40% less, 60% less action speed instead of stopped.
Curses and not apply curse immunity. Is there any plans for curse maps? Because curse maps, I feel like, were pretty painful, and we mostly just were able to ignore the problem due to curse immune flasks.
So there are now some new passive skills which affect curses that you could consider, but basically we're wanting it so that if you're playing a curse map, rather than going curses, get rid of it, you instead think about what the curse is actually doing and find some way of mitigating that particular effect on your character. This sounds like work, but it's not really that bad.
Okay. There's
that's right.
Changes prepared for.
Yeah, I had the belt wrong.
Ailment immunity and stuff like that, and sources of those things.
Yeah, we do we have done some work on element immunity. When we actually had a look at element immunity, there, and this is covered in the nerfs and the manifesto, there were quite a lot of very, very, very powerful ways that just trivialize the concept of having element immunity. So we've done some work there. Now it's a more diverse set of things players have to focus on, which is just one of the nerfs we're going to have to discuss and, learn to love together.
That is going to be transformative.
Yeah, we just didn't want to turn this into
Raider
a
and
3-hour
Elementalist were Raider and Elementalist were two of the best ascendancies this league because of their ailment
I
immunity.
know exactly. I'm trying to wrap us up.
We can
around
keep
there.
chatting while they're playing Royale, though. I'll be just over here playing a bit.
I will definitely be doing some Royale streaming later, but I'm going to get up a condensed version of this video when this finishes.
This time around.
Oh, I really hope we can do. We had problems both of the last two launches with stuff, and we put a lot of effort into fixing this. So specifically, the problem with queuing has been completely sorted. The queue will be fast like it has been in the past. The issue that happened before cannot occur again. It is literally removed from the source code. That is not going to occur. The database problems that we had at our last launch, which are interestingly to do with page sizes in our character database for the tech guys out there. Get your page sizes right in your databases. Anyway, that is now good. We should be fine. We've put a lot of work into that. So we're expecting a very smooth launch from a technical point of view. And of course, we've learned not to give paid streamers priority to get into the game more quickly. That was a mistake and will not happen this time.
League box affinities was briefly mentioned. Does this mean controller clicking league items while in your stash will automatically transfer over to the league boxes? And does that apply retroactively to things like the heist locker as well?
Yeah, so we've enabled the affinity system for both the expedition and heist lockers.
Oh,
you just
finally!
go to the heist locker and turn on affinities
Finally!
just like normal, and when you're in your regular stash and you control click a heist item, it pops over there.
So good.
That's one of the best changes so far. Like, I'm liking the power creep reversal, but that's even better.
And as tradition, I'd like to also inquire as to if there's any news on the progress of improving item stacking, pickup radius, things like that.
Okay, so when we see on Reddit, someone will post, look at the amount of currency here, and they show a screenshot with an absolutely unreasonable amount of currency to pick up. And we're like, what possibly can spawn that amount of clicking? This is ridiculous. Like, we look into it and we find, for example, so the Atlas passive, which enables King Harbingers, right? So that creates up to 4 or so King Harbingers in a map. And these dudes, for some inexplicable reason, were spawning over 60 rare monsters for the fight, right? Which is completely unreasonable, each. So there's hundreds of rare monsters. And then there's like a sextant mod that says you get 3 currency item drops per rare monster. So you're getting
King Harbinger nerf confirmed.
Currency item drops. It is completely reasonable to say, why do I have to pick all the stuff up? And also completely reasonable for us to fix that issue. So that particular one, the King Harbinger one, is one of the nerfs that we're doing here. But to get to your actual point, though, our philosophy here is where possible, we will stack things so that it's a couple of clicks if there are a lot of items. We don't want to have it so you have to click 15 times. 2 is enough for that. And the reason why it is 2 rather than 1 is because it is the concept of opening a trove of stuff and getting multiple piles of it out. Like, it's representing hundreds and hundreds of base items on the ground. We're coalescing breach splinters together. That was an example.
Oh, finally, breach splinters being coalesced.
So we're going through and fixing this, and as we introduce new content, we make sure to stack that. You'll notice in the footage that we released,
Legion as well, please.
You're not really seeing more than 2 of any particular type of currency together. We've also had some interesting changes to Act Boss drops. We made them a lot better in 3.14, but we've gone through here and made them a lot better again in this patch. We've coalesced items in an interesting way where obviously with like rares and uniques and stuff, you can't stack them, but we've basically said, look, we're going to add a whole bunch to the rarity so it skews more towards getting rare and unique drops. And we're going to take away basically all of the blue items. And so now you're getting far, far, far fewer, like 50, 60% fewer items from Act Boss drops, but they're just better than they were before. And so this means that
I honestly don't think we'll notice that still,
stuff, you get a much more
because the bosses take so long to get to,
as opposed to entire screen full of junk to look through.
Any potential on like extending pickup range or something? There's a lot of awkward situations where your character has to move that moves the labels around and things like that that make the whole experience a lot less comfortable. Even if there's not a lot of items, it can still be quite straining.
Nothing to talk about in 3.15, but this is something we are very aware of.
Good stuff. I will ask that question every Q&A.
No worries.
Just track progress. Just interested.
this.
Alright folks, at
new
this
style
point I
lead
think it's
announcement
probably a
live
good time
streams,
to
a few
call the
times. How have you
stream,
found them compared
given
to
that
the
Battle
old
Royale
media
is up, and I
tool
assume that many of you want to
We
go and
think
join
it's
it.
we think it's a lot better for a few reasons. It's really
So
good to be able to talk
why
directly
don't
to
I
the
just
community. And while we love the
close
fact that there were so many
this
journalists
down.
interested in explaining the information.
So, yeah, I think I'll call the stream at this point. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm going to record a condensed version of this video, which will basically go through the fact that there's a Flask change summary and the like, and I'll be posting that onto YouTube shortly. After that, I think I might jump over to Twitch and start streaming myself getting absolutely annihilated in Battle Royale. If anyone's got any last questions though, definitely fire away. While we've got the chat still going here, but hey Wilmado, I'm going to record a TLDR at this point. So basically, the very short TLDR is massive Flask overhaul that is functionally a big nerf to Flask power, but will also make it so that it's also a nerf to the damage to your wrists that they cause, and that there's there's the sort of new stuff around in the league. There's very little sort of little teasers that's come out. Like it's all been, there's the actual expedition page, and I'll go through the expedition mechanics a bit in the summary video. I need to rewatch them for that. But the expedition changes are, the expedition mechanic looks like it'll be vaguely Legion-esque in various ways. And Ward Overshare, just answering Overshare's question, Ward is a new alternative to Energy Shield, Armor and Evasion that's on the new bases only, and it is essentially, if you're familiar with Elemental Aegis, which is something that you get in the Elementalist from the Bastion of Elements node, I think it's called, also from the shields that drop in the Twilight Temple, unique map, it's going to work like that, except it's for all damage. So the first hit you take every 5 seconds is going to be tremendously reduced. I don't think it's going to be very strong on its own, but I'm open to being proven wrong. And it will be really good on bosses like All that have one massive hit every now and again that gets through. It could be really solid there. Yeah, Last Epoch I need to actually try out. I keep meaning to give it a go. But it'll be late in this league, especially with Battle Royale being a thing. Like, Battle Royale sounds like it's going to be so much fun. Everyone raved about it when it was on last time, and I just remember it being at like one of the busiest times in my 9 to 5 that came up, and so like we were at crunch time on a project, and so I couldn't get to play it at all, and was sort of really gutted about that. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. And Spec Shadow, on your question about stacks, it seems like they're doing some sort of crunching of breach splinters, so that instead of getting, let's say that you do pretty well in a breach, last breach that I did had 19 Chaeola splinters in it. Instead of having 19 splinters dropping on the ground, you might have one stack of 8 and one stack of 11. So that'll be a huge improvement. Hopefully they do that for Legion splinters as well, because Legion splinters are the single worst defender in the game, I think. And that'll be a godsend if they've done that. So yeah, that's what I believe they're doing. Anyways, thanks all for tuning in. Like I said, I'm going to call a stream at this point, and I will put up a summary. That summary should be up within the next maybe 75 minutes or so. And then after that, they'll be streaming over on my Twitch, which is twitch.tv/sirgog. And I will be streaming myself going very badly at Battle Royale. Yeah, thanks, Jack.